Welcome to the Preferred Blades podcast. I'm your host, Gary Creely, with my co-host, Douglas B. Chapman, a podcast for knife guys, by knife guys. All right, so this is our official first episode. Actually, technically, it will be labeled episode 2 just because of the way iTunes labels their podcast episodes. So this is episode 2, and I think we have a pretty good show for you. I think we're going to spend the most time on the Spyderco catalog, and that is something that, Doug, you know a lot about, don't you?
That is near and dear to my heart, Gary.
Have you read through the catalog fully yet? Are you?
I will be enjoying some pages for the first time today.
Okay.
Others I have gotten to peruse briefly.
Well, I've looked through some of it as well. I paged through all of it, but not closely. So there's not a ton new in it. That would probably be my main observation there about the catalog.
So any listeners that want to follow along with the podcast as we review different segments of the Spyderco catalog, if you go to the Spyderco website, spyderco.com, you'll see a resources tab in the main toolbar. Under that resource tab, when you hover over the word resources, is catalog. That will be where you want to click, and then you will want to also, once the page loads, click on the 2018 Spyderco Product Guide, and you will be able to follow along. We'll give you some page numbers as general references for keeping up with the dialogue.
Doug, that was an extremely detailed set of instructions about how to get to that catalog. If they can't find it, it can't be found with that level of detail. I like it.
That's the idea.
So you had a memory lane thing here, and this was about a couch destruction at so Doug and I went to the same college, and there was an apartment. It was almost like a fraternity house as much as anything, and there were 4, sometimes 5 guys. We all got together, pitched in for rent, and lived there, and we played with knives sometimes, and there was a sacrificial couch that Doug described. What did you say I was doing to that?
So this couch had to be removed because it was past the duration of its utility.
It was teal.
And instead of just throwing it away, there was a concerted effort to dismantle the couch with knives and potentially swords.
Yeah, it's a little bit fuzzy now about whether there were swords involved or not. I knew we had swords back then, but I don't remember if we used them on the couch. But one of the things that brings up is a little bit of the timing of sort of our entry. Doug and I obviously were in college at the same time. We were also about the same age. Where our sort of knife knowledge starts. And in terms of really understanding, when I was a young teenager, basically I thought buck knives were like that was the apex of fine. Pocket knife was buck. So, and honestly, back in those days, I think that it stood out a little more than by today's standards, and they certainly don't hold that position anymore. But I remember that's sort of where I started from, and that would have been, so I'm 43 now, and that would have been, I was a kid, a young teenager, probably in the mid to late 80s, and companies like Spyderco were really kind of on their early days at that point. And in the introduction, I mentioned they were hard to get. Now, today we can get anything we want online, but imagine if your knife buying options only included what you could go to a store and buy. Imagine if Walmart was your only source of knives. You'd have a different perspective for sure. I suppose the thing to do back in the day would have been to go to knife shows and try to get something. But I guess it would have to be a big knife show to have some of those knives represented.
It would.
So I have a funny little thing So in the introductory segment, I told you about my. There it is, so you can hear that it's real. My bar of S30V. That. Do you know what year you gave this to me?
That probably would have been 2005, 2006, somewhere in there.
Okay, so that's actually later than I thought, but that makes it 11 years ago. And I'm getting real close to doing something with it. I think I'm going to make a Carter Cutlery original neck knife with it. It's pretty. It's a 1 inch. It's only 1 inch wide, so I'm limited with the kinds of knives I can make with it. But I think that's going to fit on there just nice, and that's what that will become. So we'll keep you up to date on that. And it's called
Excellent.
the 12
I'm glad you're finally going to get some use out of that piece of steel.
the 12-year. Now, let's see, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, or whatever that is. That would have been pretty new, cool steel back at that time. So
Yeah, that was something that obviously at that point Spyderco was transitioning from 440V, which is currently under the
S60,
label S60V,
you which
and
by the way,
it
I'm kind of
was.
interested in. I have heard that is becoming available again.
I haven't found it yet, but
Neither
I
have
would
I.
keep an eye out for sure.
So the next thing on our agenda here is knife show and tell, which is sort of ridiculous, seeing as this is a podcast and you can't see anything. Which brings up another interesting thought that we are thinking about actually doing some video and putting it up on YouTube, maybe, possibly, uh, in future dates. Certainly, we'll have several episodes under our belt before we do that. But that is a consideration. Maybe when we get some feedback, we'll know better whether that's a worthwhile thing. But a lot of these things would be nice to see them. But I don't know. For me, I listen to podcasts when I'm driving. I don't know until I asked Doug to do this podcast. Did you listen to podcasts at all, Doug? Knowingly?
I did not intentionally listen to podcasts. I was more of a YouTube review person,
Yeah,
and I enjoyed watching tabletops and
sure.
uh, Dutch bushcraft knives has a soft place in my heart. I think they have a lot of fun in what they do, and some of what they do is reasonable. A lot of it is just showmanship, I would say.
Yeah, well, that's important too, to keep the viewers, keep the clicks rolling. I've always been a bit of a podcast junkie. I probably have, I don't know, a dozen or more podcasts. I don't always get to them. I kind of have them listed. I use Stitcher. I have them listed in priority order, and the ones down at the bottom. Let's just say it's got to be a long trip before I get to them, and they're just not as critical. But they're always updating, just the way that they're sort of syndicated. It's just a great thing when you're driving. And, as I mentioned before, I think there are two other knife-dedicated podcasts that I know of, and I'm sure people will let me know if there are more, and I'd be more than glad to plug them as well. But I just get through that content so fast that I was like, oh, man, I wish there was some more out there. So, yeah, that's part of it. So this week's Steel of the Week. We're starting out with 440C. 440C steel. And why this steel? I think when you talk about cutlery steels and knives, high-end steels, 440C at this point was sort of the granddaddy of them all. And a lot of people are poo-poo on 440. And part of the reason I think they're poo-poo on 440 is because there are some Chinese companies. I won't mention any Ganzhou names, but there are some Chinese companies that say they use 440, and others who I speculate isn't actually 440. Maybe it's close to or similar to 440, And the other reason I think 440 gets a bad rap is 440C, which is important because there's A, B, and C. That 440 gets a bad rap is because a lot of manufacturers would run it softer than and they a lot of times production knives run Rockwell hardness soft because it's easier to machine, and the further you temper it down, the more toughness you get, and so warranty wise, you would have a blade that would have less warranty issues. Of course, you take a hit in edge retention, but you get those warranty issues. So I think for those compounding reasons, 440C has gotten a bad rap. What are your thoughts on 440C, Doug?
440C, I mostly knew back when Buck was still using it. As Gary mentioned earlier, my first hunting knife was actually a Squire, a Buck Squire, which was smaller than the 110, lighter, thinner, and more of a drop point. It's not a clip point or a Bowie style. So a lot of those knives had what I would consider a fairly thick edge. So a lot of folks had trouble sharpening them because of the quantity of steel that had to be removed
Hmm.
in order to refresh the edge. So it was never one of my favorites. I have more experience and have used as a maker ATS 34, which is in the same sort of chemical family as 440C, 154CM, some of those that perform in a similar way in my experience.
Yeah,
But
there.
it's fine. It's probably not one of my favorites, but I would not shy away from it.
I wouldn't say that it's among my favorites, but I would say it is among my highly respected steels. Uh, it, as you said, it's the mother steel of all these. CPM 154, which is the powdered steel version. Uh, ATS 34, which is a ingot version, and they fill the ingot in a different way that allegedly makes it cleaner.
Right.
RWL 34, Robert W. Lovelace is what that stands for. And I believe that is a Damas steel, and that is a powdered steel, if I'm remembering correctly, which a lot of custom makers really seem to like. There's nothing wrong with ATS 34, and I'll be honest, there's a lot of new steels, 440C. There's a lot of new steels out there, like the, was it 13CR MOV, um, and those type of steels that are nowhere nearly as good. Even something that's a pretty nice steel that I actually like a lot, BD1, not to be mistaken for BD1N, but BD1 is a nice steel, but I don't know that it has edge retention better than 440C. Uh,
Right. Now, as we're talking about steels, listeners, you're going to hear the word good thrown around quite often, or something that we like. When we're referring to a steel that is good, it could mean that it has acceptable combinations of edge retention, toughness, and or stainless properties.
corrosion resistance.
440C is a very nice combination of those features. Uh, so that whole category of family of alloys, 440C, 154CM, CPM 154, ATS 34, RWL 34, they all are a real nice sort of sweet spot for that triangle of attributes that steels exhibit when properly heat treated.
Yeah, and in the case of something like 154CM or RWL 34, these powdered metals, when you compare them, I think in the knife community, a lot of people think S30V is far superior to these steels. It's probably got, no pun intended, an edge on 440C itself But like 154 cm or particularly CPM 154 or the other powdered versions of it, frankly, in terms of an everyday user, well, edge retention tests that I have seen put those steels pretty close. And I can tell you, I've made knives out of both of them, and 154 cm is a much nicer steel to work with. I feel like it takes an edge better. Um, the thing that S30V does is it's pretty heavy on the vanadium, and so besides chromium carbides, you have vanadium carbides, and basically it just makes it. I think it's a lot harder to grind a blade out of, and a good bit harder to sharpen. So in terms of living with it, CPM 154 it just is a nice finishing steel. So
Sounds like those steels, that family, in a slightly more polished edge. S30V, I would run a little more toothy with a lower grit before buffing, um, and just maintain that micro serration a little bit more.
yeah, yeah, you have to finish the edges a little differently, but it seems like the thing these days everybody wants these highly polished edges that they take pictures of like mirrors, and so yeah, if that's your game, 440C or 154 cm is a good steel to do it with, and it does hold an edge well, and it does hold an edge
And it
well.
would sharpen fairly quickly in the systems that most folks are using, either water stones or guided systems.
Yeah, yeah, and it's very serviceable. Very serviceable. It's underrated in my opinion, and yeah, still respectable. 440C all the way up through. It was the super steel of probably 40 years ago. So that that was a premium knife steel at one point. Obviously, technology has brought us further. Okay, enough about knife steels. Let's talk about our show and tell knife of the day. Who's going first? Why don't you go first, Doug? I hear you. I hear you flicking something in the background.
Well, I'm mostly clicking a mouse, but
It
I
sounds like flicking a
brought
knife for the
to the
purposes.
podcast
Yeah, for the purpose of
a
the.
custom knife that I purchased a while ago, and it has sort of a strange story. When it came, the handle was black and shiny, and it it had some strange markings on it. And this is the handle material, not the blade. This blade was made by Dean Aragon, who, podcast followers, if you do not know, is a custom maker. He recently ran into a spot of trouble with his drill press, so we are certainly praying for Dean that he would get better. He ended up in the hospital with some pretty significant injuries to his hands, but he is a very good maker, and he made this knife. What I found was it's it's got pink G10 scales that were, I'm gonna guess it was black nail polish that covered them. So I traded for this knife, or bought it, I can't remember. It was off of Facebook, and had wanted to try one of his knives. Found this as a pretty good deal, and it's a neck knife. It's along the lines of an Azula, but it has full tang. With the weight, I can't imagine that it is skeletonized, but it is yes, pink G10 confirmed by my wife because I'm somewhat colorblind, and the blade
so,
performs very well.
so let me get this
But I
straight.
just
Somebody
thought it was
sold you.
funny.
They sold you a blade and fingernail painted the liner so that you couldn't see they were pink. Is that what happened here?
It's not just the liners. The whole handle was black,
Oh.
but it was all just a coating. Even the sheath has an overlay of pink Kydex that I don't know if they spray painted or used it must be spray paint because I don't see any brush strokes. But that is also rubbing off, and sometime I will just drill out the grommets and take that overlay off if you didn't glue it in, um, so that I can have the
Wow.
sheath the way it originally was.
That's interesting. That is interesting. Knife makers, let's talk for a moment. It's just you and I here about pink. Dudes don't like pink. You already know that. But girls, from what I understand, because I'm not one, but from what I understand, girls do not like pink stuff a lot of times, particularly in a knife, because it's as if it's patronizing to them. Oh, you're a girl, so you want pink. That's my 2 cents, for what it's worth.
I know quite a few girls who have pink knives, but I also travel in Spyderco circles where the breast cancer awareness push that they have is the pink-handled knife, the
Yeah.
Native 5. They've done it throughout the years in different models. I think they've done Enduras and Delicas,
Sure.
but they uh, offer a pink knife. So even
Well,
when I worked out there, I carried a pink knife during Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
right. Well, that's matching the theme color of a cause, so that's a little different. I would say you get a pass, I suppose, for a pink knife. I got a pink. So I had sold knives at a farmer's market in a cabinet. I just had a little space and would put knives in there, and I got a pink Rat 2 folder, Ontario Rat 2 folder. Fantastic little knife for the money. And that pink, I think I still have that pink Rat 2. Bad
Is
idea.
that the 440 version or the D2 version?
I think it's AUS 8. It's the AUS
Oh,
8 version. Yeah, which is the cheaper one. The D2 one, they bumped that price a good bit for that D2. It's like another 15-20 bucks for the D2. So for my show and tell, I have a knife and a sheath separate, two different things. So the knife is a recent acquisition. It is a Carter Cutlery original. Now, for those of you who don't know, Carter Cutlery opens Mary Carter. He opens his designs up and says, "Hey, go ahead and use these. If you get his book, I bought his book, and he gives you the designs in there. And one of the designs is the original neck knife. I have probably made a dozen of these things in various forms. There's a perfect shape, which is a little bigger, and they're similar. And I said, "Doggone it, I should get one of his." And one came up for a reasonably fair price on eBay. Now, one of the things about Murray Carter is uh, he forges his a San Mai, which the one that he does a couple different varieties. The one I like is the stainless on the outside with a carbon steel in the middle, and that's what this is. And it's usually a mild stainless, so it's not a hardening stainless. It's just a mild stainless, which gives the knife a lot of extra toughness. And then the edge is, I think this is white number 1, which is a similar. It's a Japanese steel, similar to 1095. It probably has a little bit more carbon, and then we get into the unicorn tears and fairy dust, and it's a very clean, fine-grained steel. So, but it's very finicky to heat treat. I know that firsthand because I messed some up. But so that's the knife, and I finally got one. It's actually out of his Muteki series, which is the ones that his apprentices do, and it's also it's an early one of those. So that's that knife. I like it. It's a neck knife. I'm not a huge fan of neck knives, so I haven't worn it a ton, but I've kind of had it around and used it that way. The second one is I got a sheath from Joe Fu, and I don't know if it's Joe Fu or if it's Joe Fu. I've talked to him on Instagram a number of times, but I've not actually talked to him in person to know the pronunciation. So I do a model of knife that's called the Mako, and the Mako, and then the metal. So, for instance, the one I have in my hand at the moment is the Mako M390 because it's Bowler M390 steel. And then I'm going to make it in lots of different. I'm going to make it in lots of different steels, kind of like a Spyderco Mule in that regard. But anyway, that's not the story. The story is I got one of these in the pocket sheaths from Jofu, and it is just awesome. It's his leather work is very, I do leather work, so I have some of the base on, and it is very fine leather work. And it allows you to EDC a small, and that's what this is. This is about the size of an Azula, and I got the case for an Azula because I figured they were similar enough that it might work, and it does. And I was just talking to him about doing a run of them because I might do these on Kickstarter with some exotic steels. But anyway, it's awesome. It's just great. Now I can have a fixed blade in my pocket without looking like Crocodile Dundee. So I am psyched for that. All right. We had a question here. Who is the custom maker who has impacted your knife making journey to date? Both Doug and I make knives. So I'll let you answer this first, Doug. Who is the knife maker who has most impacted your knife making journey?
Well, I'm going to start. I suspect we will do this again. I'm going to start with who helped me get started. Uh, there is a local knife maker in our area. His name is John, and he was kind enough to allow me to come into his shop, uh, use the grinders and some steel and choose some handle material, and he kind of got me started into the idea that it really was possible to make a knife, and you don't have to have a ton of equipment to do it, but it does increase your efficiency. It doesn't make your product better, but it can increase your efficiency. So I would say John gave me a push in the right direction, or a leg up, or a lift, or whatever you want to call it, and I would credit him as one of the makers that helped me start the journey at least.
Cool. For myself, I would say one of my the thing that pushed me over the top to start was actually Cut Brooklyn. Not because of the knives he made necessarily, but because I wanted one of his custom chef's knives. And he gets about 650 at the time. Now he's up to 750 for one of his custom chef's knives. And I'm just like, that is crazy. I can't afford that. That's too much. Doggone, I'll make my own knife. That was kind of my attitude. Now, $10,000 or more later in equipment, I now can produce such a knife for a lot less. However, of course, I got to recoup those costs and all the steel I burned up messing knives up in the process of learning. But that was sort of the impetus. And from there, my education on knife making came in a big way from YouTube. Honestly, I don't know how people figured out how to do things before YouTube existed. But, man, I learned so much. Probably the first guy was Walter Sorrells. He has a real methodical way of walking through a build or a project and teaching a lot of skills, both big and small. And for whatever reason, I really got into Jack Lore, who makes a woodlore bushcraft knife. I think it's part his story. I think he lost his job and or retired or something. I'm not exactly sure of the details, and started doing knife making and it's kind of in the world of bushcraft knife making. He's kind of there's Alan Wood, and he's probably right behind him. Yeah, he did a ton of really good video. He is meticulous. I'm not meticulous like him. but he really, I have one of his knives, which was not easy to get, I'll say, but I do have one of his knives, and yeah, I look at it as sort of an example to shoot for, and I think I can make, I I can I can rival it now, but took took me a while. Took me a while. And the bushcraft style, I don't know why. I just like them. I probably like making chef's knives the most because they're the ones I use the most more than any other knife I have. I probably use cooking knives the most. So yeah. So let's take a look at the Spyderco catalog. And Doug and I talked about this before the show, and what we said we would do is look at all the things that are new in the catalog. So we're not going to bore you with every knife in this catalog, uh, but we're going to talk about new knives. So, and Doug will be the in-house authority on some of this because some of these models I am not that familiar with. But the first one up is the Shaman. It's on page 21, 20,
Yes.
20 and
Shaman
21.
is in the native series. It's considerably larger than a native. If you know of the native lightweight or the current generation, the native 5, uh, they are they are smaller than the Shaman. The Shaman is quite a bit longer than those blades. They are still using the S30V steel in the
Unfortunately.
Shaman, and I'm trying to get some blade dimensions. Looks like 3.16 inches from the tip to the shoulder of the scale material with a full flat ground blade. The edge is 1.2 inches, and the thickness looks like it's 3.7 millimeter or 0.145 of an inch.
145
Overall
thou.
length 8.31 inches with a compression lock. Comes in full plain edge or full serration.
That, sir, is a killer.
So, I did not realize that this was a native variant. So, they could have called it a native Excel, uh, but they called it a Shaman. It looks like
Well, there
also
was there
it's
was talk of a native chief at some point, but the shaman is what has come to market so far.
okay. I see Shaman native. I get you. I see the connection there. I didn't get that at first. The one difference looks like is that G10 sort of rounded handle, a little more sculpted handle.
It does have machining, much more than the flat slabs of some of the others where the corners are just broken. This is actually a radius that has been applied to the profile. It's a little finer on the butt of the design and a slight bit finer on the front of the handle scales. So the roundover is not quite as deep in those locations. But it really does change the feel considerably. I actually have one here with me as we're going through this particular episode.
So is it this model is new for 2018 or to come in the tail end of 17?
Um, I believe it was introduced in the mid catalog last year. I
Okay.
happen to have one of those here
So it
also,
gets to
so I
keep
will
the
take
new
a quick.
moniker. So what about the little native? Is that also was that around before this year?
I believe. Okay. Uh, First, we're looking at the Shaman. That is in the mid-year supplement of 2017
Okay.
as a announcement, and I do not see the little native, so that must be new this year since it is shipping.
Okay. That looks interesting to me. Oh, the other interesting thing about the little native is that they have a back lock and a compression lock,
Yeah,
which
yeah, that is unique, kind of like the Sage series to some degree.
And the one with the compression lock does not have a lanyard hole.
Okay.
Which is interesting. You know how much I hate lanyards, so
So
I could
that
care
we had
less.
moved on to page 22 for the little native,
Yep.
for those following along.
And then this carbon fiber native 5 looks a little interesting. Again, sculpting and machining on that handle even more so than the Shaman. And then S90V steel. So that looks like it's of interest.
Yes, if you like a thin carry, that would be a very nice option. Now, thin being from the outside of the left side of the scale to the outside of the right side of the scale. It is sleek in that direction only. It's a standard native profile, the rest of the exterior.
Very interesting. Very cool. So, moving on to page 32 and 33, we have the pair of threes, and there's 4 new ones. The one is S110V steel with the, what, like a purple?
Blurple.
Blurple? Blurple. Got it.
That, sir, is a killer.
So, I see there's a black DLC coated one here. Is that new? Are these new, or were these in the supplement as well? And then there's a couple camo ones.
I think some of these are going to be new this catalog. Nope, I stand corrected. They were in the mid-year supplement. 2017 mid-year supplement did include all of these variants.
Okay. And because I thought that 110 was shipping. I kind of would like a para 3, and I think the S110V would be the one I would like. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I ended up with a S30V version with the stainless satin finish to the blade and the standard black G10
Yep.
scales.
So moving along to page 38, there's a new Manix 2 with a backlock. That's interesting. I like the Manix. I'm actually not nuts about the what do they call that lock that they use? It's access lock-esque, but not nearly as nice.
It's the caged ball bearing lock.
The caged ball bearing lock. I'm not a huge fan of them. They're very sticky, and the spring tension's pretty heavy. I don't hate them. It's something different. I like variety, but I like this option for a backlock. Although a backlock's pretty hard to close with one hand. Got to be, yeah. Guess you could do it against your pant leg or something, but that comes with a certain set of risks.
Well, depending on your finger placement, they design them so that the integrated choil is really what's designed to come in contact with your finger, not the blade, not the sharpened edge. So if you're up right by the pivot pin with your index finger when you're trying to close it, when that drops down, you should be pretty safe with a back lock.
So
front lock.
The next new one is a Dragonfly with Zome Green scales, which is, I've already wasted too much breath on that because it's just another handle color. Nothing else interesting about it. The Rescue 3 says it's new. So is it is it a redesign? It looks very familiar to me. On page 49.
The Rescue 3 is a redesign. So the Rescue 2s had the ball or the cage barrel that went all the way through the handle. It was a 2-part with a washer.
Okay.
And the clip was recessed into the FRN. This gives you 4 clip mounting positions instead of just 2, right or left-handed, tip up or tip down. It's threading into the steel liners. It's a pretty significant upgrade.
Okay. Cool.
And it's flat ground by the looks of it, which historically the rescues had been Sabre hollow ground.
Yeah. Cool. So next page, 55, we have the native salt. I guess there wasn't a salt series native before?
No, this is first release of that in a publication that I've seen as far as the catalogs go.
Oh, interesting sidebar here. This native salt 5 is not H1 with a yellow handle. It's LC200N.
Right.
Or as Alpha Knife Supply calls it, Z-Fitnit nitrogen steel. It's an interesting steel. It has a very low amount of carbon, like what's it, 0.2% or something, 0.4%, really low. So there's a lot of nitrogen in it though. So it's pretty cool. Interesting switch. I guess the native's made in the U.S. Is this one made in the U.S.?
That
Yes.
one is. It says it is made in the U.S.
Yeah, I didn't think they made any of the FRN handled ones in the U.S. I thought those were all Secchi.
Well, no, the original native lightweight was made here in the U.S.
Okay.
That had an FRN injection molded handle, and these are, same sort of thing. But this shares the same blade steel as the Spidey Chef, which is on the same page when you're looking at it digitally.
The problem with going through this catalog is, I want some of these, and I want this native salt now that I know it's LC200. H1, well, I wasn't crazy about it, but I do like having a blade in H1 just because it's a novelty. Same with this. That's on my list. It's probably not too expensive either.
That shouldn't be terrible. See if I can come up with an MSRP for you. Oh, let's get to the right window.
So they must be set up in Golden to do that injection just for that knife.
Could be. They have expanded capacity beyond what was there when I was an employee.
So can you explain to me in the catalog when it says restricted, what does that mean? To just, here it is. Automatic knives are federally regulated items or restricted items. Sales of these is limited to qualified personnel only as defined in the statutory language of 18 U.S.C. Section 176, blah, 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 blah. Qualified buyers are required to complete and physically sign an acknowledgement and representation form available through your Spyderco sales representative or downloadable on the web.
Right. So that explains what restricted items are.
Huh.
Back to the Native 5, salt. That is a C41PYL5.
Yes.
That has a retail MSRP for 2018 of $179.95.
And what's the map on that?
Map is about 117.
117. So that's gonna be the neighborhood of street price. I think that's what's a regular native's probably what, $30 less than that?
Well, it depends. If you're talking the lightweight, so
like a lightweight.
that would be the C41 SBK SBK as an example is $144.95 with a map of about 95.
So you're going to pay, about $22 more for the special steel and the pretty yellow handles.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's worth it. $20 for something interesting.
Now, LC200N is one of the YouTubers that I know we both tend to watch, Cedric and Anna.
Oh, yeah.
He actually really likes that steel, likes the Spidey Chef that employs that steel. So that should be a pretty nice bit of edge retention and huge corrosion resistance.
Right.
With reasonable toughness. So that's a pretty well-rounded alloy for everyday utility.
Yeah, I'm interested. Like the H1, you could drop at the bottom of the ocean, um, and it wouldn't rust. I don't think this is quite that, but it's almost that.
It's supposed to be very good.
And if it can have decent edge retention, I mean, H1, um, H1 is really low edge retention. Like among probably of all the steel Spyderco cells, I don't even know if the MOV 13 MOV stuff is less than that. Its edge retention is low on its list, but it's supposed to be pretty tough. In addition, now there is this. It's what they call a work hardening steel, and the idea is as you sharpen it more, that it gets harder. Although, I've also been told that it needs to be warmed up a little bit, so you gotta sharpen it on something besides just a water stone to get that work
Yeah.
hardening.
The edge retention in the plain edge is considerably different than the edge retention when it spends more time on the grinder getting serrations. The serrated H1 at one point was the pinnacle in the Catra testing that they do in-house for Spyderco. It was the top edge holder
with the serrations.
with serrations.
You know how much I love serrations, and
Yes.
which is to say, I do not like serrations. But a steel like that steel, particularly if it's in like a rescue knife or a knife that you might be using on a boat, where there might be a time you absolutely need to cut through some rope, and a dull straight edge blade is not going to cut through rope if it's not sharp. Period.
It's just going to slide.
And so, there's a time and a place for serrations, as much as I don't think that time or place is very frequently useful, like for EDC purposes. Next, we move into the all-famous value folder. The funny thing about companies like Spyderco, I do a lot of audio stuff too, and audio companies, you think of these companies as sort of the flagship things that they make. You think of Spyderco for some of their more higher-end stuff a lot of times. But the long and short with most of these companies is their bread and butter are usually on their high-volume, lower-cost products. And so as much as these are the lower-brow Spydercos, they're probably what's paying the bills a lot of times for Spyderco, or at least to some degree. And they start out with the Polestar, and the new one is the what's it called? Alcyone? Alclone? How do you pronounce that? What is that?
I'm not even sure how to pronounce that one.
Alcyone. So, Alcyone. If you're Spanish, maybe Alcyone. Alcyone. I don't know. Well, we'll have to get some education on that. But basically, it's a step down size from the Polestar, and I really like the Polestar. I have the Polestar, and I feel like the Tenacious line, and this might get me some haters, but I feel like the Tenacious line is overpriced for what it is, frankly. I think all they need to do to make that a better line is put a better steel in it. And for what they're charging, they should, in my opinion. In terms of the Polestar, however, it feels like, to me, a little nicer fit and finish on the knife. So the knife in general, it has kind of a unique bluish, kind of soft kind of G10, and which is fine. I like blue. It almost looks like corduroy, and not corduroy, but it almost looks like denim. And it has BD1 steel, which is a very serviceable, decent American-made steel by Carpenter. And this smaller one that I can't pronounce also has that steel. So they're just sort of filling out that line. If you are thinking about getting a knife made in China,
I love China.
I would suggest getting one of these two, and not getting the Tenacious or the Efficient. Now, if you want a really big budget knife, you might be pushed into the resilience. But they've really there's some in here I didn't even realize they had. The Chicago. Uh,
Oh yeah,
is the Chicago a slip joint, or is it just short?
I I don't believe so. Um, let's see if I can zoom in on that. The cat is
Liner lock.
Walker lock, and the Chicago looks like it is as well.
Okay. So it looks like this year Spyderco has jumped a little bit further into the world of flippers. We have the Hanon and the uh, Silver Axe. Both kind of, as Spyderco goes, both kind of a edgier design, I'd say. I think they both look pretty neat. And then the Advocate, which they had. Did you have any experience with those two knives? Well, probably not because they're new. That the Silver Axe or the Hanon.
Those were all after my time. I departed from Spyderco in 2007,
Well, I thought
so
maybe
it's
you put them
been a
on the
while.
Chapman preferred order sheet.
Right. Well, I have not ordered any of those
Those are pretty
yet.
high end, I think. They're pretty a little more of a specialty buyer. So there's two knives in here. One is the sub hilt, the Valaton sub hilt, and the little sub hilt. I saw somebody on one of the groups converting these to automatic, which I thought was kind of interesting. This falls under the specialty knives. So the new one is the little sub hilt. The full size sub hilt was out before, and then this other knife, the Parada. Now, I haven't held it. I haven't used it. It looks ridiculous. It looks utterly and absolutely ridiculous, which means maybe you want to buy it because it'll probably get discontinued and be one of those rare vintage pieces someday.
That looks like it would actually skin well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it could skin well. Yep. It's from a designer's point of view, the placement of the hole and it is just a very weak design. Like you can see exactly where that would break if it ever broke. It has basically the ricasso is very it's not tall at the ricasso, it's very short at the ricasso, and the Spidey hole is pushing right into it. So it's a very precarious design.
Well, again, if you're going to use it as a skinning tool, there's very little chance you're going to break anything. That's just not that sort of an environment.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose, but I suspect the majority of people buying this knife, I don't know who buys this knife, but I don't know that they would be skinners per se. I just want to take note that the Wolf Spider on page 87 is still in there. I have one of those. I think it's really cool. You can only buy it through Ray Mears' website in England, so you got to pay shipping from England. So it's made in Colorado, flies over my house in Pennsylvania to get to England, and then comes back to me. I pay an extra $30 for the opportunity. I got mine when the exchange rate was extremely favorable, so I did all right on it. I bought two, and I sold one for a little bit of turned a couple bucks to offset the shipping. But yeah, so moving along here, a lot of their specialty knives. Oh yeah, this one has interest to me. Gentleman's knife. This one-eyed Jack. I feel like I should get one of these. Should I get one of these, Doug?
You might enjoy it a lot.
It's a little liner lock. What is the difference between a Michael Walker lock and a liner lock? By the way, this is a new knife.
Well, I think they're very similar, if not identical. It's probably identified as a Michael Walker liner lock.
Okay. So they're kind of, since Spyderco was under them. Now, another new knife here that's got my interest peaked is this Chaparral Lightweight and FRN. It has the CTS steel. So this is another. Oh, this is a Taiwan. Yeah, this one's a Taiwan. An FRN from Taiwan. Maybe a first. That's of interest to me. I don't have a blade in XHP. I hear a lot of people talking about XHP a lot. From a knife maker's perspective, carpenter steels are just a pain to deal with. They don't really cooperate with a lot of the people who distribute steels. You know, like, well, Alpha has some, Alpha Knife Supply, which is a big knife supplier, and SB Specialty Metals have some, but they don't have nearly their catalog, and you can't just call them up and order it. Whereas CPM, you can pretty much get as much of anything you want. Bowler, I can call up, get anything as much as I want. Carpenter makes it more difficult, and the price for the see, almost all these steels have analogs. For instance, Bowler M390 is also CPM 20CV, is also CTS, I think it's 204P. Could be wrong about that, but I think that's what it is. But anyway, they're analogs. They're virtually identical. The process is very similar how they're made. I mean, at the end of the day on the knife, you would never know the difference between them. And but the Carpenter version is just a lot more money. Now, when you're Spyderco and say, hey, I want 10,000 pounds of this steel, I think you might get a little better deal that's in line with the other producers of steel. So anyway, makes it a little tough for XHP is actually one that's out there though, and I just haven't gotten around to using yet. It's on my list. All right, moving along in our catalog here. My catalog's being a little. I'm on page 102. There we go.
Page 104 will have some interest for you, I think.
All right. Let's see when we get to some new
Take a look at page 104. There is a new Sprint series with a steel that I've not had any experience with. So it includes the Ladybug, the Man Bug, Dragonfly 2, Delicate 4, Stretch 2,
yeah. Yep. In fact, I saw that steel on Alpha Knife Supply and thought, that'd be cool. They do. It's the exact same steel because it's a Sanmai, just like this. But when you look at it, the Vitoku steel. Again, I think we get into the fairy dust unicorn tears territory when we're talking about things that are just harder to quantify. But it's basically along the lines of a 1095 or a maybe a white steel number 2 or maybe like a white steel number 2, white steel number 3, something in that neighborhood. Basically, a pure, clean Japanese carbon steel, which, some will argue will take a better edge, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I have a hard time seeing this perform dramatically better than well-heat-treated 1095, personally. Maybe I'm all washed up. I don't know. But that was my... But I do like Sanmai steels, and I will own a Dragonfly in this. For the record, my favorite Spyderco model is the Dragonfly. So, there you have it. What's your favorite Spyderco model?
I'm still very taken with the standard military. I have a variant in S90V that I love and carry daily. And since I'm right-handed and I don't mind tip down carry, it works well for me.
Cool. Well, uh, as I'm looking across these Sprint ones, which basically are all new, uh, uh, so there's a carbon fiber PTT, which French custom maker Fred Perrin. There's a Warren Klepp HAP 40 Delica. That's interesting. A Copa stainless steel. I've never been a big fan of stainless steel because of the weight. Spider Hawk Salt Sprint in orange. It's a bill hawk bill. You ever sharpen one of those things? Anyway.
Yes, it's very easy on the Spyderco Sharp Maker. Not a problem at all.
Well, you know me, and I don't like to sharpen anything I don't like to sharpen with anything that doesn't have a motor. So anything with a motor and a bill hawk can go very wrong very quickly. Although this looks like it comes in serrated. This next one is highly interesting to me. A Calypso Junior, which I think I have one of those in a laminate ZDP from like 10 years ago.
Absolutely. 2005.
Okay. And it's a great little knife. Rides around in my truck. I hardly ever use it, but it's a great little knife. But this is Agami Super Blue. Super Blue, one of the things that the Japanese do, so when you hear like white steel #1, blue steel #1, Super Blue. So white #1, white #2, and all the whites and the blues are variations on recipes of carbon, pretty basic carbon steels. When you get to Super Blue, they up the carbon a little bit, and then they're adding some vanadium and some other things. I don't have the chart on that in front of me, but
manganese.
Yeah, that's a less simple alloy, the Super Blue. It has a little more interest in it. So that steel interests me a little bit. And the 1095 is about the highest carbon content standard steel that the U.S. has readily available. And these Japanese steels are really hard for us to get. Japan doesn't like to export them. Sometimes you can get them sideways through Europe and different things. I have some white #2 that I've worked with. I messed some of it up. I'll admit that. But because I got it too hot in the heat treat and the grain structure was like sandpaper. But it's very finicky to heat treat. But it has a higher, not by a ton, but it has a significantly a noticeable amount more carbon, like 1.3%, 1.4%, whereas 1095 has 0.95. So it's like 1095 with a little more carbon, which makes it a little less tough and allows it to get a little bit harder. But some guys can get 1095 pretty hard. So I don't know. The other part about it is the fine grain structure that these are capable of, and just can take insanely stupid sharp edges. So I'm told. But I haven't used enough of it to be able to verify or deny it. So one of the new things that's kind of a somewhat the dog tag folder, this little cardish sized. There's a few of them, the dog tag folder and the square head. These are pushing the envelope of what is a knife. They're almost like box openers.
Yeah, they're actually kind of fun to use. If you remember the Kiss knives from, I think it's Columbia River Knife and Tool, they did a series of Kiss knives.
Okay.
This has a similar function. I just like the materials significantly more. This is I'm speaking about the square head. I have the original square head that is CPMS 30V blade steel with what I believe is titanium, and it is a very light package, and it's a chisel ground, high saber chisel ground knife, so the edge stays really close to the steel because there's only one, or to the titanium, there's only one scale, and that is important. So they have a little L-shaped scale, so the steel nests right down to just before that L shape to keep you safe and keep the edge safe.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting little design.
Definitely something different. So on page 115, this is an interesting new deal. The clip tool, the standard and the rescue. I look at this. So these are made in China.
I love China.
And what I would say is it's kind of Spyderco meets Victorinox a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how these are received. Then we move into the fixed blades, the Waterway, which is an interesting blade. It's 9.5 inches overall with a 4-inch edge. Fixed blade, looks like a G10 handle. No visible pins. Is that a G10?
It looks like a Contour
Yep.
G10
Yep.
scales.
It is.
CNC machine.
Waterway. What's the steel on this guy? G10.
LC200N.
Ooh, that could be interesting. Yeah. One of my gripes about Spyderco, now I didn't see the price on that, is their fixed blades are a bit salty, if we can use that term. They're usually a little expensive as fixed blades go. Here is an interesting one. Zoomer. Very interesting grind. It has this real sort of angular plunge line, and the handle kind of comes up on the spine of the blade pretty far. Let's see, what's this meant to do? It's evolved out of outdoor tool that transcends the functionality of traditional bushcrafts. It is a blade expertly crafted from CPM 20CV, which, by the way, I didn't mention, it is my favorite stainless steel, or Bowler M39, any of the analogs of that steel. So they're basically selling it as a modern bushcraft. Looks interesting. Any thoughts on that one? It comes in blue. No, that's the other one.
The Zoomer, I would need to hold it to. A lot of Spyderco designs, you don't really understand them just with visuals. You have to actually engage the ergonomics to fully understand the tool. That is one that I would have to wrap my hand around before I really gave an opinion.
In fairness, that could be said of, just about any knife. Pictures don't always do them justice. Or, in some cases, pictures make them look better than they are. That's the worst when you buy a knife. It looks so great. And then you get it in your hand, you're like, oh. So, the Spidey Chef says it's VG10. Where's the LC200?
Where's this? You talking about folding knives, or are you on kitchen
I'm
knives?
on kitchen knives, page 136 and 7.
Okay, so the Spidey Chef is a folder. This is the chef's knife K12P that you were referencing, and it is a completely different animal.
So is the Spidey Chef actually made for a chef to use?
The design could easily be used for food prep. The contouring of the edge can keep your knuckles off the cutting board.
Okay.
So that is sort of the idea with that.
Interesting. Yeah, whoa, I totally missed that. Somehow, the chef's knife from Spyderco and the Spidey Chef got melded in my brain, and yeah, and I got them a little bit confused. So, that's we won't. I think that's all the Spyderco knives. You move into merchandise and bird knives and all the other things, but that's the end of the Spyderco knife portion of that catalog. And the one little topic I wanted to close with is Chinese knives.
I love China.
You know, so now Spyderco, back in the day, Spyderco didn't have any Spyderco knives that were made in China. Now they have a few more this year that they added. And that's part of the reality of doing business is producing stuff in China. I don't hold it against them. But what I think is interesting is, designs like the Rat and the Rat 2, one of the things that held them back a lot is their blade steels. And some of the knife companies I don't know a lot about yet. In fact, I think I'm going to order one here over Christmas. There's a few of them, and I'm not going to. There's Riot, and there's Wee Knives, and there's Kaiser, and there's all these different Chinese brands that are putting out really high quality flippers and folders, and some of them are actually really, Wee in particular. If you go on their website, they've got dozens and dozens of makers that they've partnered with. So they're kind of the, production maker partnership people these days. And I don't think these knives have fully been discovered by the entire knife community. I think for others in the knife community, there's a level of suspicion with Chinese products, just in terms of, let's face it, a lot of the things from China have dubious quality at best. And, these days, I mean, look, your iPhone's made in China, and it's, if you get the X, it's $1,200 or whatever it is. So, I mean, China can make good stuff, and they can make some junk too. And as a U.S. knife maker myself, I mean, how do I feel about China? Usually the enemy of the custom knife makers is less China and more Pakistan. But nonetheless, it does pose a threat to these big companies like Benchmade and Spyderco. I mean, and they're not going for the Spyderco Delicas. They're going for the $200 and $300, like the Dominoes type of price range, where you're in the more $200 to $200 to $300 range with knives. So if I was those companies, that would keep me up at night a little bit. What are your thoughts on Chinese knives in general, Mr. Chapman?
Well, I like the way Spyderco did theirs. They went and visited the factories. They know the individuals. They know the conditions. They have partnered with some decent craftsmen in China. So from a responsibility standpoint, I think they've nailed it. As far as the newer, higher end Chinese knives, it's inevitable. Their skills will increase. Their machining capability will increase as they are utilized more and more. And eventually they will. When Spyderco first started making cutting tools, first they made the sharpeners, and then they started making actual knife designs. They partnered with makers in Japan, and that was a bit controversial at the time.
Right.
And they were able to overcome that and had to make these long-term business relationships, and they have done it very well. And I know they also go to Japan at least annually to meet with the makers over there in Seki City.
Sure. I mean, in the beginning with Spyderco, they only had Seki City, right? Like that was it.
Right.
If it didn't come from Seki City, it was a Spyderco.
It's early in the history, yes.
I mean, when did Golden come online?
I would need to refer to my copy of the Spyderco story to confirm that. But even the first natives weren't even made by Spyderco; they were outsourced, and the ones with the BRK engraving on the blades, first production runs, and they decided from that experience to open up a U.S. facility for manufacture.
Yeah, but it was a ways into their history. They had made a lot of knives by then.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's kind of an encouraging thing that, I mean, you can start a knife company without owning a knife factory. Just ask Spyderco. Get the factory later.
Yep, they had some good industry contacts that got them in touch with the right people in Japan. I know Almar was someone that they were very much in tune with.
Well,
And,
it seems like it seems, as far as I know, it's been the same factory since day one, right? It's not just any factory in Seki City. It's a specific factory in Seki City that's pretty much married to Spyderco at this point.
I think they have at least 2 points in Japan,
Oh, they do have another one.
and I'm not exactly sure. I've never been there. Japan's on my bucket list, but so is Australia and New Zealand. So they will probably be combined in the same trip, just from the sheer volume of hours spent in aircrafts.
They're both pretty far away, and none of them are on the way to Romania. I can tell you that. Seeing as my
That's true.
wife is from Romania, and that's where I go when I travel. Cool. I could hit Solingen, Germany, I suppose, or Sheffield, England, but they're not quite what they once were.
Well, you could hit the Italian
Spyderco factory.
locations.
Yeah, that they make some. I like the stuff that comes out of that factory. So very cool. Well, I think that will probably mark the end of this particular podcast, and we thank you guys for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And thanks again for listening to Preferred Blades.